for the coaches that are listening to this, the coaches do a fantastic job of teaching skills as it relates to a sport. And I've always wondered if there's a better way to help the brain actually map that skill, or is there a way that we should be actually setting up our practices to enhance that learning opportunity? Is there something nutrition-wise? Is there something that I can do that will increase my players' ability to map that skill that they're learning at practice?
Well, there are two separate questions lurking in there. And one question really is, how do you get someone to improve in something that they have a deficit in? And the other one is, how do you get someone to improve just in general? And they're kind of separate because really it's a matter of how you focus. So I'm going to start with the general part first. So the general part would involve really allowing the system to do the best it can. And what that means is actually having all of the supplies necessary. And the supplies are a little different for the brain than the rest of the body. And for example, one of the things about the brain that is required more than even the rest of the body is a supply of omega-3 fatty acids. This is basically fish oil. And it's very interesting because basically one of the things that makes the brain different, and especially our brain different, is the amount of myelin that is in the brain. Now, myelin is basically the insulation of the wires of your brain's internet, except that unlike regular insulation, which just separates wires and makes them not short circuit, in the brain, the myelin increases the speed with which you send signals. It is actually what allows our brain to do what it does, because our brain has to process information quite fast, and the speed of the signals increases 100-fold when you myelinate, when you put the insulation on the wires. But not only that, when you put the insulation, it actually increases the bandwidth, meaning how much information you can send per second. So that goes up about 30-fold. So you have a 100-fold increase in speed and 30-fold increase in bandwidth. That's basically around a 3,000-fold increase in processing speed. So that's what allows us to do all the things we do. And almost any coach will tell you that to have a good athlete, you have to have all of the mechanical skills in there, but you also have to have the thinking skills, especially in relation to any sport that requires team play, and even if it's an individual sport, it would require concentration and being able to relax yourself so that you can actually focus on what you're doing and so on. Now, the myelin was actually invented by fish, meaning fish, many millions of years ago, invented this insulation, and because they had a good supply of omega-3s of what we call fish oil, which they were getting from algae basically, they put fish oil in the formation of the myelin. And once they did that, every other species since then that has myelin, which of course includes us, has to have fish oil. And we have no mechanism to actually make it. So you have to get it in your food. If you don't have it, you basically are deficient, so you don't make such good myelin, and therefore the system is not optimal for what it could possibly do. So this is one of the very unusual things about the brain, because it has a huge amount of myelin, because basically it has a fantastic internet which allows us to do everything. So that's basically a requirement that is underappreciated. Now in medicine it's well appreciated now, because fish oil is also good for the body. It prevents cardiovascular disease and all kinds of stuff like that. But it's especially important in the brain, and obviously it's especially important when you're developing the brain. As what I said earlier was Now, the brain is basically always developing, and when you are developing a new skill, you are literally changing the wiring, and you're putting in more or less myelin where you need it in order to make the wiring optimal for the performance. Because basically in the brain, really performance, doing things really exactly and doing them really well, being at the top of whatever the game is dependent on timing. Not just timing in terms of how you do your movement, but to produce the movement, you actually have to have a whole bunch of signals from different parts of the brain arrive at a particular place at a particular precise time in order for you to put together these movements with all of the pieces that are required in the movements in order to perform whatever the athletic thing is, or playing the piano. It requires the same exact process. So because the distances in the brain as the signals are traveling are different, when things arrive, is totally controlled by myelin, meaning myelin controls the speed, and therefore it can control the timing of signals arriving at a particular place to produce a particular movement. Therefore, when you're really practicing, when you're really trying to improve anything from playing the piano to writing to dunking in basketball, what you're really doing is putting in the right amount of insulation on all of the circuitry required to perform that function optimally. And therefore, you are always improving the timing in the brain, which results in optimal function or optimal performance. So this particular substance, the myelin, becomes actually very important. And another way to understand it even more clearly is to think a little backwards, to think of when you see a baby that just been born, they can do what? Almost nothing. Because function, to be able to do something, actually requires the timing. And when we're born, we have almost no myelin in our brain. We have all the wires, we have all the computers, which are the nerve cells, billions of them, they're connected through the wires, and they're sending signals, but the signals are not timed at all, and therefore there is no observable function. The baby basically can breathe, and their heart is beating, and they can suck. Those are the circuits that are actually myelinated and therefore have function associated with them. Beyond that point, everything that anybody on this planet has ever been able to achieve in terms of function has been due to myelinating those circuits in the brain that underlie those functions. And to become really good at whatever it is, whether it's playing the piano or playing basketball or tennis, whatever, basically you have myelinated that circuitry in order to make the timing in the brain optimal, which then manifests in real life as better and better function. So everything you've ever learned has been due to practice, and to become really good at anything, whether it's sports or music or being a professor, whatever, it's also due to practice.